Right, so this talk, I'm going to be entitled The Small World of Coincidence. I'll just explain a little bit about me because it has a reference later on as I'm going to some of the stories. So for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Steve Jones. Amongst other things, I'm a practicing pagan. I've been for many years, and I run Wakefield Pagan Boot, which is the oldest and longest running pagan meeting in the country. I was also for 21 years the only pagan magistrate in the country. The relevance of that will become obvious when I go on to it. So, what do I mean by the small world of coincidence? Well, right, you will immediately recognise that incredibly handsome young gentleman on the right-hand side is me from the 1970s. You'll also tell from the way I'm dressed that I wasn't exactly going along with the current fashion at the time. I don't know if anyone recognises the guy. Well, if you can read that horrible font that I found of you. The guy on the left of me is a man called J.T. Edson, now deceased, who used to write Western novels. He was an English writer of Western novels. He lived in Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire, and he actually wrote well over 200 novels in his time. Now totally forgotten about, unless you're a fan of and aficionado of Western. As you can tell from the way I am dressed, I was a fan of his books, and he was one of the first authors to actually have a fan club. His then secretary was forward thinking. This is well before pre-internet days. I think this is about 1975. It was the first meeting of it. Anyone who wanted to, you could go down and meet up with him. And we used to have a sausage and beans supper and it was close to get to Calvary. Now, the reason that this is up there, not as to prove what an incredibly stunning man I was in my youth, is because when I went down to see him on this first time, one of the things that JT used to do is he used to dedicate a lot of his books to the barmaids and the landlord and landladies of his local pub, which is a good way of getting served first at the bar, I would recommend, and make sure that you got served ahead of anyone else. So I knew when I went to Melton Mowbray that his then pub of choice was called the White Lion. And I actually booked into the place. It's like the Black Swan over there, used to be. So I was booked in there. But I'd not actually met him when I first came. And in those days, he didn't have his photograph on the back of his books like a lot do now. So I knew he lived there. I knew that was his favourite pub. And I knew I was in there. And I knew at some stage I was going to meet him. So I go into this pub. And I should explain that as a member of the J.T. Edson Appreciation Society, which I was, you had a card that said J.T. Edson Appreciation Society, to people who remember. So I walk into this pub with my little briefcase, put it down, check in, go down to the bar, and there's a guy standing at the bar with a pint, dressed in full cowboy gear. I mean, Stetson, leather chaps, holster, gun, the lot. You see, and I thought, well, I don't think he's J.T. Edson because he was too young. He was older than me. I mean, I think I'm about 17 now. And this guy was 20. So I go up to him and I assume he's obviously there for the same reason I am. So I show him my appreciation society and say, oh, so you're here for this as well. So he looks at me and goes, what's that? I said, well, J.T. Edson Appreciation Society, isn't that what you're here for? No. So I said, well, why are you dressed as a cowboy? And he said, I always dress like this. And I went, all right. And at which point he points to JT, who just come in and he said, oh, that's the guy you're looking for. So I would go over and introduce myself, actually. This guy, carries on the drink. So I explained the situation to him. And I said, oh, yeah, I thought that guy over there was a member of the thing, but he says he always dresses like that. And I said, well, we've never seen him in here before. And he was never ever, if it wasn't for eyewitnesses, he never came in the pub. or was seen locally, or was known at all to them as some local bloke who dressed as a cowboy. So that's what I class as a coincidence, because I'm going to talk about, you know, that's like a strange type of coincidence that I'm interested in. Just as a matter of thing, while the pictures up, you will notice I am clutching in my hand what looks like a miniature mine. The reason I've got this photograph taken is because that thing I'm actually holding is an American thing that he picked up on his travels. This was his study, complete with loads, as you can see, guns in the background, most of which are edible. That is an anti-burglar device from the United States, basically a billiard ball, which is studied with carbon steel spikes. And the idea of it was, I don't know if it's still produced, but the idea was that if somebody broke into your house, you pick that thing up and you stuck it in them, and while they were trying to pull it out and screaming, you hand for the cops or your gun, being American. And I actually said, because there was a guy from the local paper taking the photograph, and I said to him, I want a photograph of me holding this, because nobody will believe me that this thing existed. And the reason why he's looking slightly worried is because originally that was his left hand, and he walked up behind me, I didn't know he was there, to be in the photograph, and I nearly plunged it into his chest, because I'm looking at the photographer going like that, and then he goes, whoa, he turned around and he stood next to me, so that's why he's got a slightly worried look. So that was my, the Melton Mowbray cowboy. Whoops, one way. I've got to remember which order I put these in there. So, switch these around a bit. So, this talk is, like most of it, was originally planned 3 years ago, so I've slightly switched it around. Now, the other part, that's a coincidence, the other part that I'm going to cover is what I call the small world situation. That's the type that's a little bit more of a coincidence and stretching things a bit more. It's the thing where it seems a bit more meaningful, or things carry on a bit more. I mean, the basic small world sort of scenario would be where, as I've explained to a few people today, where you sort of go on holiday somewhere exotic, you know, go down to your beach, put your lounger out, turn around and your next door neighbour's on the next wall, and neither of you knew you were going to be there. That's a small world type of scenario. So I'm going to explain a few that's happened to me, but before we get to that bit, there's just a couple that I want to mention. Now, the first one is what happened to a woman called Violet Kessam. Does anybody know who Violet Kessam was? No, right. Violet Kessam was a nurse employed by the White Star Liners company. And somebody can guess where this is heading, but not all what you think is going to happen. So, in 1910, she was, I'm going to have to put all this because I can never remember each one, but basically, she ended up in 3 separate shipwrecks and survived each one, all for the same company. So, in 1910, she was on the Olympic, which was then one of the large liners, when she was a stewardess on the Olympic. She was on board when it collided with HMS Hawke in 1911. She survived the shipwreck. Ship was able to be repaired and continued sailing until it was scrapped, as it said to the boat. Then in 1912, she goes on board the Titanic. And we all know what happened to the Titanic. She was a stewardess on the Titanic, and she survived the collision with the iceberg. She made it into a lifeboat, number 16, and was later rescued by the HMS Carpathia, like a lot of them. Now also, which doesn't say there, what is supposed to have happened, and she said, and it's recorded, she claims that when she was in the lifeboat, somebody handed her a baby and said, save my baby, and she took this baby into the lifeboat. But nobody remembers her having a baby when she was on board the Carpathia or afterwards, because at one instance she was saying, you know, whatever happened to the baby, and they couldn't find this baby, and a couple of people over the years said, oh, I was that baby, but it was never actually proved that they were. They were just trying to cash in. Now, you think being in shipwreck twice would be enough. But no, in 1916, as I say, she then became a nurse and was working aboard the HMS Britannic when, obviously in 1916, it got torpedoed. Well, they think it was struck by a torpedo. There's another version that says it's a mine. And of course, she made it to a lifeboat again, but was sucked into the propellers this time. She jumped out and survived. Hit her head at the bottom of the boat, survived. And then she was saved by another lifeboat and pulled out the water. And then, you know, I like the bit at the end, before she went in the lifeboat, she made sure she bring a toothbrush, because she said that was the first thing she missed after the Titanic sank. So she was prepared this time, third time looking, she saved herself and the toothbrush. So this is a woman that survives 3 separate shipwrecks, which to me is a real small world bit. Something is happening to this woman to make her lucky. She survived, she lived until 1953. So, as I say, that was Violet Kessam. You can look her up, you can see pictures. She's quite a stunning looking woman actually, but I didn't have time to put a photograph of her up. Now, this is an example. Unfortunately, the name of the Wilmer McLean. This is Wilmer McLean. This is the type of coincidence I sort of put down to the Cosmic Joker, those who can read it. What happened to Wilmer McLean? Well, Wilmer McLean, the very first battle of the American Civil War, which is known as the Battle of first Manassas, if you were on the Union side, or the first Battle of Bull Run if you were Confederate, took place, as it says up there, on July the 21st, 1861, on Wilmer McLean's farm. Now, for anyone who doesn't know the American Civil War, the Union Army were expecting an easy victory over the Confederates. They thought it was going to be a walkover. To the extent that when it was obvious the battle was going to happen, people actually went out to Washington in buggies and cars to watch the battle. And women and children were watching the battle until it kicked off, and then they realised that this is a damn sight bloodier affair than anybody thought, and they all ran back in panic, and the Union Army was routed. And that was the first battle. There was the second Battle of Manassas as well, which the Confederates also won. And it goes back. Now, what happened to Wilmer McLean was when he realised the horror of it all, he decided that he was going to get his family as far away from any possible battle as he could and move out of Virginia and get as far as possible. So where does he go? He goes to a place called Appomattox. And he finds the Appomattox Courthouse, which is where Robert E. Lee surrendered the Confederate Army to the Union forces after the last battle. So this guy goes as far away as possible and still ends up with the last thing. So the starts and the finish, official finish of the American Civil War. There were actually a couple of battles that went on after the surrender, because in those days they didn't have the internet or email, so not everybody got the message. Ironically, the very last battle of the Civil War was won by the Confederates after the official sign. Yeah. Not many people know about. I forget where it was, but if you look it up on the net, they won it because they didn't know either side or that side. Actually, they lost. So this poor guy, you know, he starts in his backyard and he finishes in his backyard, ends in his parlour. So for me, that is a bit more than coincidence. That's the Cosmic Joker effect. It's a bit of a black Cosmic Joker effect, for those who don't know. It's a bit of black humour that seems to be arranged by something up there. You know, this guy tries to get away from the war, and the war follows him. You know, he's historically first and last. When I was looking originally way back when I planned this back in 2019, I had some information. I was aware of stuff, and I wanted a bit more on the Violet Kessam thing, because I was vaguely aware that somebody had actually survived shipwreck, so I couldn't. So I looked at my notes, couldn't find stuff, and somebody actually gave me a Waterstones card. So I thought, I'll go in the local Waterstones in Wakefield, which is where I live, and see if there's anything there. Now, Waterstones in Wakefield is a very small place, and the section that deals with weird stuff basically is very small. So I was looking around and I didn't see anything, and then there was a thump, and a book fell off a shelf. landed at my feet. And I hadn't touched the shelf. And that was the book that fell off the shelf and landed at my feet. So, you know, which I was unaware of, and it had the information I was looking for. So there is a phrase which is probably going out of business now because libraries are not using it. Has anybody heard of the library angel? Yeah, this is the library angel is supposed to be when you do like I did, or in the library, when you go in the library looking for information, and you know you either randomly pick a book and open it, and there on the page you're looking at is the very information you're looking for, or you go in the library in search of some information, and you pull out a random book which turns out to be the very one that you were looking for, and people go, that's the library angel looking down on you. I'm giving you the information. Nowadays, because it's all on the net and we've all the Kindles, the library angel probably doesn't bother, just because although you know, you may randomly go to an internet website and find information there. So that's a sort of variant on the coincidence bit, a meaningful coincidence where the stuff that in this instance I was looking for was in the book. Obviously I didn't grade most of it, and most of the rest of this is going to be about weird things that's happened to me. But one final one. This fine-looking gentleman was a guy called Charles Coulin. He was a Canadian guy just before the First World War. He was born on Prince Edward Island in Canada, but made his way on vaudeville and on stage. He was, if I remember rightly, he was a not very good comedian and all sort of things, and sort of dramatist. He died before the First World War. I'm afraid I didn't include the date of his death, and I forgot to check on it, but I think it's the date. Well, basically, when he died, he was not exactly successful. So they couldn't afford to ship him back to Prince Edward Island, where he came from, because, you know, he's knocking about with a bunch of poor actors. You know, he had to make a lot of money, and he wasn't that famous. So they buried him where he died, which happened to be in Louisiana. I got it in the back of my head that it was New Orleans, or near New Orleans. So there he is, in his coffin, and if you know anything about New Orleans, you ever seen New Orleans, because the water table is very high, that's why you don't dig graves in New Orleans, because you can't, it fills with water. So that's why if you look in New Orleans cemeteries in Louisiana, they're buried in vaults, so they're bigger. Because otherwise, you know, you can't, it's soggy and it rots. So there's Charles in his coffin, in his grave, and then what happens is his coffin. There is a huge hurricane, which I remember right, it's in 1907, and you look at this is an excerpt from the news report. And after the hurricane, so soon after midnight, the wind died down, the waters receded. Through the long, you can tell this is like, it's not quite Victorian prose, but this is Edwardian. Through the long, early morning hours, survivors silently clung to drifting wreckage, or huddled together in what remained of standing buildings. The light of dawn broke upon scattered pools of water, masses of wreckage and bodies, and coffins that have been washed up from the cemetery. One coffin containing the body of Charles Coulin, it says there, famous Irish actor, well he wasn't Irish, he told us all, but he was Canadian, was carried out to sea and into the Gulf Stream. It drifted around Florida, up the eastern coast to Prince Edward Island, 2,000 miles distant, where Coulin had lived most of his early life. Washed up on the beach. They got the coffin and they buried him on Prince Edward Island. So, something helped him. So, right, I'll just go back a bit. Before I cut that one. So, down to me, one of my first sort of small world things happened because for a lot of my life I've worked with the civil service. The first place I worked at age 16 was the land registry at London St Anne's. And I worked there till 1977, and then I transferred over to York, where my dad got a job, and I transferred to the Ministry of Defence. And I lived in York from 77 to 83, and then we moved over to Bolton. well, my dad had got a job at Berry, so I moved with him. So I'm living in Bolton, and at that stage I wasn't particularly interested in, I got interested in paganism via tarot cards, researching tarot. And I got interested in tarot cards when I lived in York, and then came over to and Christian. So by the time I lived in York, I was a tarot reader, and I started to do some psychic prayers and things like that around Lancashire and whatever. Now, when I got interested in paganism, I met a guy from Preston called Simon Green, and at the time, like a lot of my life, I didn't have a girlfriend, and Simon was actually engaged to be married. So he very kindly said, well, I've been writing and in contact with this gorgeous girl who lives in Manchester, and her mum's a tarot reader, and I think, you'll hit it off. So he very kindly gave me her address. So I write to this girl, who's called Fizz. That was her actual first name. Turned out her mum was a fan of Charles Dickens, for anyone who knows. Fizz and Boss, that was the surname, the nickname from Charles Dickens in his illustrated. So she called her Fizz. And Fizz Greyjoy, she was called. So I write to this girl, and she writes back and says, oh yeah, obviously. So I arranged to go over to Manchester, where Fizz and her mum at the time were sharing a flat with Fizz's small child. And she'd come to Manchester from Berlin, from Germany, where she had been married to a squaddy, but that was little, and she'd moved over to Manchester with her mum. So I went to see this girl, who was absolutely stunning. We got on, and at the time the mother, she knew my mum was out, so I sat down with a cup of coffee, and this woman came in. I went, you're Steve Jones? I said, yeah, I know I am. No, you're Steve Jones. Yes. Don't you remember me? I said, not quite. She said, I'm Chrissy. Oh. Now, it turned out that Fizz's mum was a woman that worked in the next office to me when I was at the land registry. So she'd last seen me in 1977. In between me moving to York, this woman had moved to Berlin with her then infant daughter, purely wing, because that's how Chrissy rolled. Got interested in tarot and become a tarot reader herself out in Berlin, and then her daughter ended up marrying a squaddy, and also was a burlesque dancer, which is not the area that's interesting for me. And then moves back to Manchester, and then her daughter's information given to me, so she bumps it into me again, and I'm now a tarot reader as well, which I wasn't when she last saw me. So it's like, whoa, Sadly, we sort of drifted apart after that, so Fizz never came to us, but it's like, first time I went, wow, when these things happen. So, because that's a summary of sort of roughly what happened. 77 to 83, and this actually happened about 1985, so when I met Chrissy and back. So we've got to get tarot, so that's a small world. Now, this guy is a guy called Bob Franson. As you can probably tell from the way he's standing, he's actually interested in martial arts, although actually that's taekwondo, something else. Now, when I was doing one of the many things I've done, when I was on the dole, and those of you who've ever been on the dole might remember a thing called employment training. It was yet another scheme by the then government of the day to try and massage the figures, and basically you ended up working for 10 quid extra to your benefits as any form of job. And I ended up working for Bob, who at the time was living in Leeds and running psychic fairs. And he wanted somebody to book psychic fairs in places like the Black Swan, places like this, you see. And we had actually met one another because I was doing the old tarot reading before I was on the job. So he did actually know me. At first he didn't want me because he knows what he offered me to sort of out. But then it's like, well, there's nobody else, cool. So I ended up booking fairs and working and doing all sorts of stuff for Bob. So two of my closest friends at the time lived in Preston, who were pagan, and we used to have a coven. We had a coven together. Although by this stage I was living in, now I'm in Wakefield, so I used to go and see them. So I was chatting to Brian and Val one day, and I was telling them about this guy Bob. Now, Val, who's by that stage I'd probably known about 15 years, I knew that she used to live down in London, and she got together with her husband, Brian, one of the old Stonehenge Free festivals. That's how they got together, because Brian gave her a lift and things probably ended up in Kent and then getting married. And I was vaguely aware she had a previous boyfriend. But when I started telling about this guy Bob France, and I said, oh yeah, he used to be a Scientologist, and so he gives him free stalls and stuff and all. She went, hang on, Bob France, Scientologist? And she said, ask him what his date of birth is. And she gave his date of birth, and ask him what his middle name is. So she provided me the date of birth and the middle name. So I said to Bob, oh, by the way, what is your date of birth? He tells me. So I told Val, and she went, that's my old boyfriend. That's the bloke I lived with in London before I met Brian. And she, you know, as far as she knew, last time she met Bob was down in London. And here he is living in Leeds and I'm working for him. So he's actually now out in Thailand. Because it's one of life's con men, Bob. He does actually know what he's doing when he's teaching taekwondo, etc., etc. But he was always one step ahead of the inland revenue when I worked for him. So eventually he must have gone to Thailand. I must have. So that's really balanced small world. So it's also one of mine. And we're doing good time, right? Now this is where things take a bit of a dark turn, and this is sort of the last tale. Well, I might go through movie, but this is a weird one, a very weird one for me. I explained at the start that I run the oldest pagan route in the country. I founded it in 1988 and it's still going, so it's over 30 years old. So over the years, many people have come along to my route, and we talk about all types of things, not just witchcraft, we talk about the paranormal, 40 and stuff. And if it's weird and you want to talk about it, you can come along and we'll listen. So, in about 2000, this girl came along, and she's a girl called Kathy Hancock. And she told me that she was an ex-prison officer, and she was interested in all sorts of unusual stuff. And she used to come along 2 or 3 years later. But she also mentioned, she was living at the time in Wakefield, in a flat, and she sort of mentioned that she had this very, very jealous boyfriend, who she was scared of, and she wouldn't take anybody back to her flat, and particularly, because at the time she said they weren't living together, but she was still worried about this bloke, and used to also, including killing her dog. So it's like, oh right, okay, don't really want to meet this bloke. And as a result of this, she was actually suffering from, not ADHD, what is it called? when you like, you know, like when you need to line up all your books in alphabetical order and all that. Thank you. OCD. Yeah, I get confused because there's so many bloody things nowadays, acronyms. But yeah, OCD. I remember on one occasion we went back to her house, a couple of us, and she took us in. She not only had the books lined up in alphabetical order, they were in colour order as well. That's how OCD she was. But she was terrified of this guy, and he smashed the cow on her. So we were sort of basically were. So she came for like a couple of years, and then we fell out because I was running a pagan camp over near, like one I'd helped found over near Bridlington. And she came along over there, and she didn't have a tent. So a friend of mine said, well, I've got a spare tent, you can sleep in that. But she came over with somebody else. So we erected this tent for her, and she copped off with somebody and never spent a night in the tent. And I had a blazing row with her because she'd not had the decency to come over and tell us. And I said, you know, we don't mind you copying off, but at least come and tell us before we put the bloody tent up. You know, and then she went off. So that was like the last contact at the time that I actually had. And that was 2006. So I've not heard really of anything from Kathy. Now, as you can probably guess from the fact that says News of the World, that wasn't the last I heard of Kathy Hancock, because in 2009, there was a case in Bradford of a guy being seen on CCTV shooting dead a prostitute with a crossbow live and then turning around and doing that to the camera. And it was this wonderful guy, the crossbow cannibal, aka Stephen Griffiths, who was Kathy's boyfriend. So, and she gave evidence at the trial in 2009. The three pictures on the right are the three prostitutes who he was convicted of murdering. However, he, at the time of his arrest, under questioning originally, said he killed 5 at least. But when they came to charge him, they could only prove that, and he shut up about the other 2, and still has shut up about the other 2, at least another 2. And they couldn't find evidence because, so when this turns out, and I see Kathy Hancock, I think, bloody hell. So that's the psychotic boyfriend, which he was. You know, I'm pretty glad I never met him, because that's not a bloke I want to meet. Thinking that's going to be the end of the story. Now, as I said, I was working at the time for, until recently, I worked for the Tribunal Service, what used to be called the Appeal Service. The Tribunal Service, for those who don't know, is if your benefits are denied, like PIP or universal credit, whatever, you have the right to appeal. And if you appeal, then and the appeal is accepted, it goes before, unless the DWP admit that they were wrong, or your local council, if it's council tax, it goes before a tribunal for the benefit, and then if you win, and just as a side note, for anyone who's in that situation, I strongly advise anybody to appeal the decision, because tribunals are currently running about 84% in favour of the appellant. So most people who go in front of the tribunal win, which is not something they usually tell you about. So at the time, I was running the Tribunal Service, and I used to, what we used to call clerk the tribunals. Basically, if you went in there, I was the guy you would see when you came to the waiting room, and my job was to tell you what was going to happen, and probably because people go to tribunals. Tribunals are a legal thing. Just, again, this is just general information. A tribunal is not like a court of law. People think it is a court of law. They think they're going to be in the witness box and swearing on oath to give the truth or to the truth. No, that doesn't happen. That's not. It's more informal. You're sitting in a chair. You come to usually on the tribunal 3 people, depending on the benefit. There's normally a doctor. There's normally the legal chairperson, which can be male or female. And then, depending on the benefit, they used to have like a social worker or somebody who's got no benefits. That was for most cases. So, but every tribunal has a legal chair, usually a solicitor, and that. So, as I say, I was at the time, I'm working for the Tribunal Service, I'm clerking them, which means that when there isn't an appellant there, because I'm the person who's typing up on the computer what the result is. So obviously there's nobody in, I'm chatting to them. And because I was a magistrate, they knew that, I got on really well with them, because it's like you and I, and as you look at by now, I'm quite handy at talking to people. I was chatting on this tribunal when this case was going in 2009, and just me and the tribunal chairwoman at the time in the room, and I said, oh, you know, look at this bloody case like. And she said, oh yeah, I know about that. And I went, oh yeah. And she said, yes, because I'm the deputy coroner at Bradford, which I didn't know. And she said, so I handled the inquest into these. And she said, the thing is, they think he did more cases, because one of the things that Stephen Griffiths did to get rid of bodies, he dismembered them, and he threw the bits into the River Aire in Bradford. So, you know, parts of bodies were turning up prostitutes and put together. But she said, they think he probably did kill more than 3, but because he took him bits in the river, they had no proof, because he washed away and they couldn't find anyone. So, you know, they think he did more than that. So that was like coincidence too with this one, that I ended up talking to the coroner about it. So it's like, oh, that's interesting. So, as I said, I'm not seeing Catherine. And then one person who turned up at my moot is this guy. guy called Gary Smith, who came along. Interested in paganism, used to come for a while. I knew he lived in Bradford. But then we got chatting one day, and somehow I got round to talking about Chappie and Stephen Griffiths, and at which point Gary goes, "Yeah, but you know it's my neighbour, don't you?" And I went, "What?" He said, "Oh yeah, I lived in the same block of flats." He said, "He lived in the flat underneath me." He said, and he said, he was actually on, he said, "What?" He said, "I was on the same committee with him." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, it was a private block of flats that Griffiths lived in." And he said, "We had a tenants committee." And he said, "I was on the tenants committee, as well as living immediately over it." And he said, Griffiths got himself onto it, but he said he never turned up at meetings, because he was too busy knocking off prostitutes and whatever. Because he used to make a hell of a lot of noise in his flat. And I'm like, "What, like screaming?" And he went, "No," but he used to play his music really loud. And he said, "I'm bloody glad now I never went down and asked him to turn it off." So again, you know, small world. So there's the next door neighbour, well, not quite a poor neighbour of him, who I turn out to also know. So that was sort of that. And then my two of my best friends in Wakefield, called Brian and Miriam, I've known for a while now, Brian and Miriam. What we do, apart from this pub meeting and stuff, we do events and things. And usually, at least once a year, obviously pre-COVID, they've got a large back garden, so they used to have like garden parties, and we'd invite people over and they'd say, "Come round," and we'd have a thing. So they were having a summer party, it was midsummer, and loads of people there, say I go over. One of the people I always used to invite was a lad who was not quite their next door neighbour, but on the same block as well, who was autistic, lovely lad. So when he came, he was always accompanied by carers. So he comes along, and he got a male and a female carer with him. I was sort of vaguely clocked him, male and female, and they sort of shut out into the garden, and the guy was with him. I didn't really see him, and then until it was time for him to go, I was a bit early, so he's going out again. And as he's going out, like the bloke's going out, and sort of see this female, looked vaguely familiar. And then she left and sort of scurried out. And it was only about 20 minutes after that I thought, wait a minute, that was Kathy Hancock. And she'd obviously recognised me. And didn't want to, obviously, after all the stuff, didn't want to get recognised. So again, you know, she turns up at a garden party that I'm at. So, you know, it's like, whoa. And then, when I was actually preparing this talk, and I'd sort of got the slides and stuff like that, I was running through stuff with a friend of mine, and her then ex-boyfriend at the time was a prison warder at Wakefield Prison. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, and again, as a minor coincidence, last Monday, there was a whole programme about HMP Wakefield. And because it's known as monster management to us locals, because it's a category A prison, and there are more sexual offenders in Wakefield than any other prison in the country. It's the one prison that the unfortunate paedophiles and that can actually walk around in their own section instead of being segregated and general population, because normally they're going to be kept well away from anybody because they get killed. But unfortunately, there's so many in Wakefield they can actually feel it safe. But Wakefield took terrorists. So I'm sort of telling, back in 2019, I'm sort of telling this guy, and this guy who was a warden said, "Oh, absolutely." He said, "Well, I'll give you another one." And I went, "Oh yeah, what's that?" He said, "Griffiths had just been moved into Wakefield Prison." He said, "He's on my Andy, and I deal with it." So I'm like, "Oh shit, right, okay." The guy's no longer a warden now. And this was 2 years ago, so he may or may not still be in Wakefield Prison. I don't know, I've not asked. So, this is the worrying thing for me, on the small world bit, that I've had all these, I don't want to meet this bloke, you know, because he's not been given a whole life sentence. He was given, I think, 40 years minimum in 2009. But the way things are going about releasing people, and you know, the idiots that are on the parole board, You know, they seem to be letting people out who should not be let out. This bloke should never ever walk outside a prison. But I'm hoping that all these signs are not somebody up there going, you're going to meet him one day, Steve. And I'm going to keep sending you these notes so that you'll avoid him when he comes out, you know. But I sincerely hope that the last one of these coincidences for me isn't that I walk in the bar and the bloke stood next to me, or I accidentally upset somebody that turned out to be Stephen Griffiths on day release. Because, you know, there's been so many of these with it involved, it's just weird, you know. And he was actually interested in the occult at one time, but look, and again, luckily, he never turned up at my moods, thank God, because for a very brief period, he was living with Catholics in Wakefield, but then he moved back to Bradford, which is where he was originally, and that's where he shot the prostitute. And that is the end of the talk. If anybody's got